take your seats, so can you. Thank you for agreeing to this format, by the way. I guess when you're preaching, you know exactly where you're going and what's going to happen.
You do? Good morning.
I do. Do you not know what's going to happen when you're preaching?
You have a great reputation. Everyone says that you're brilliant, insightful, provocative, and that you're one of their favorite components to things.
I love the way this is going so far.
So, where are you from originally?
I see what you're doing. I was born in Wagga Wagga.
That's a place? It sounds like an emotion. I don't know.
What sort of emotion would you imagine Wagga Wagga to be?
We can't really talk about that here.
Can you help me later?
No, it is. It's been beautiful to be here with you guys.
We've really enjoyed having you here. I want to ask you about you, but since you raised not knowing where you're going when you're preaching, because when I listen to you preach, I don't know where you're going to end up, which is why I really enjoy your preaching. Because many of us are like, 4-point preachers. So we announce what we're speaking about, then we give you 4 points that answer the proposition. And so people have got an idea where this is going to go. Last night we were joking that people weren't amening your message, and I said that maybe they weren't.
We were not joking about that. I was lamenting that. I was like...
Yeah. And I made the comment, maybe people are a bit afraid to amen because they're not quite sure, because there's twists and turns when you preach, so you don't want to amen too early in case you amen in the wrong spot.
Yes. And, yes, I agree. I was a little bit caught off guard because it seems like in Christian communication, there's no mystery. This is my sermon title. My message is this. I'm preaching to you about this. And then we tell everyone everything they already know. For me, a bad movie is a movie where you can actually predict all the scenes that are coming. An average movie is a movie where you can tolerate it, but it doesn't pull you in. A good movie, you're watching it, and it is entertaining, but you're completely aware you're watching it. A great movie, you forgot you're watching a movie, you're inside of a story. And I feel like preaching has become a method and no longer an art. And I really feel like a compelling longing to make preaching and communication an art form. And so I like creating mystery. And when people have asked me about speaking, there's a book called Catcher in the Rye that I had my son read when he was, I think, 10 years old. And I realize now it was a little young.
Who gets their son to read Catcher in the Rye when he's 10?
We were traveling to Japan, and I pulled him out of school, and I said, this is a book that affected my life, and so I want you to read it, but if you use the profanity, I'll kill you. But Catcher in the Rye is a beautiful study in digression, and the whole book uses digression as a way of getting you somewhere. And so you just feel like it's wandering, meandering, it's just sort of going nowhere, and at the end it hits you with this explosive image of beauty and wonder and truth. And for me, that would be the ideal message, is for no one to know where we're going until the very end, and then for it somehow just to explode in someone's soul.
Is that what you said, method versus art? So the method is, didn't they used to say in Bible college, tell them what you're going to say it, tell them what you've said.
That's right, kill them with boredom. And destroy the value and beauty of the scriptures by making it so mundane and literal that no one ever wants to hear you preach again. Just keep doing it.
One of my favorite quotes on preaching, Spurgeon described much of the preaching in his day as a monotonous monologue by a moron to mutes.
And that's just with the letter M. That's good.
No. Where'd you learn to preach?
I'm learning how to preach. And because I mean, to me, like, preaching should be an outcome of your soul, right? Like all art is an extension of the human soul, and When people ask me, how do you remember everything? Because I don't use any notes, and I never use notes, and it's because if you're telling your story, you don't have to use notes. If you're actually communicating something you're remembering or you're memorizing, you need a lot of notes. But if you're communicating something that's a part of your essence and who you've become, you can just pull it out of yourself. But where I learned how to preach, I'm not really sure, because I'm extremely introverted. And so I grew up incredibly reclusive, and I almost never talked. And I was painfully shy. And when I came to faith, my brother was an atheist, and he came to faith first. And then he went public to say he was called to ministry. And so him and I went up the same day together without talking to each other. We'd been a Christian, both of us, a year. And this is not an exaggeration. This is exactly what happened. My mom ran up after the invitation, hugged my brother, and said, "We knew God was calling you to preach." And then she turned and looked at me, and she paused, and she said, "But what in the world is God going to do with you?" And
How old were you at this point?
I was 21 and 22, somewhere in there. And I didn't know either. And so I didn't have any gifts or talents that people would say, "Oh, he's going to be a preacher." But I did spend the next 10 years traveling, using my guitar, writing music, preaching on street corners, going to the Mardi Gras, pulling together a crowd, communicating to them, walking into restaurants, saying, "Could I do a concert?" I'd do a concert, then I'd talk to everyone there about God. I began working with drug cartels and people in the underground world, and I would take a basketball on the basketball courts and pull together crowds, and then I would talk to all of them about Jesus. Take a coffee pot in the downtown cities and create environments and gather crowds of 200-300. And so I learned how to preach in the world.
Right.
And not in a church building.
Right.
No one wanted me to preach in their church buildings. Nobody invited me to. And so I created my own spaces to begin to have conversations. And I think my preaching style came out of being in a world of really antagonistic, hostile, violent, aggressive people in outdoor contexts that if I did not keep their attention, they would just walk away.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Tell me about growing up, because you mentioned a few things over the course of the last few days, and I've been trying to fill in some gaps. Mm-hmm. So, born in El Salvador.
Yep.
Mum moves to America.
Yes.
But leaves you and your brother in El Salvador with the grandparents.
That's right, yeah.
Why did that happen? What happened to Dad? Why did Mum leave?
Yeah.
What was going on there?
It's tricky. One, because my mom is awesome. She's a hero. She's an amazing human being. But a part of our culture is, Latins have almost a sense of secrecy. And like one time my grandfather told my wife, Kim, "Do you know what the secret to marriage is?" And my wife said, "What?" He goes, "Tell no one your secrets." And I said, "Yeah, that's not it. That's not the secret." But so there's a lot of my past I don't know, because our family was just, shrouded in secrecy. So I've put pieces together that are a little tricky. My real father was like a linguistic savant, spoke like 12, 13, 14 languages, was teaching languages at a university. My mom was 16, he was 26, I think. My mom was also like just a linguistic genius. She just knows all kinds of languages, and I remember her singing in different languages when I was a kid. And they had an unofficial relationship, got married against her parents' wishes, and they were divorced by the time she was 19. He was an abusive alcoholic, and they were down a flight of stairs when she was pregnant with me. And so she gave birth to me, and my grandparents raised me from day one. And then she went to work for Pan Am, and she was one of the first Pan Am stewardesses in the world. And she's beautiful, And then when she was able to, she went to San Francisco, New York, Miami. She finally brought us to the States. And she married someone she'd only known 3 weeks, bad choices. But because she felt like she needed a father for me and my brother.
Right.
And he was involved in what we called creative underground economies.
So, sorry, just to go back, how old were you and your brother when you went to the States to join her?
I don't know. It's all real blurry, to be honest with you. I know that I went to school in the States from first grade, and I would go home to El Salvador in the summers until I was around 9 or 10 years old, until the war got so bad we couldn't stay in El Salvador, so we stayed in the States.
Right.
So that's the best I got, you know. And so I remember my grandparents. I remember them being my parents in my mind, and then, you know, learning they were not my parents and realizing my mom was my parent. And then they tried to convince us that my stepfather was actually our real father, and that created a psychological break inside of me. Because I didn't remember this person, and they kept telling me he was my father. Right. And I would remember my life before that, and they would tell me that life did not exist. So I had nightmares for years and years, and I could remember people, I could remember things, and they would tell me there's just no way you could remember it. You were only one, or you were only two. So they didn't believe I could remember it, but I did remember it.
Right.
And so then I don't trust my memories, because the things I remember, they tell me never happened.
Right.
And that's why I have such a high value for truth, because outside of even ever believing in God, I believed in the power of lies to destroy you, and the power of truth to heal you. Yeah.
My wife and I were talking about you in the car this morning, and we were talking about how you're quite unique in your ministry and the way you communicate. And Sam said something that I thought was very good. She said, I don't think Erwin has found a niche in the market and filled it. I think Erwin is just Erwin. And as you described the way, I mean, we're only very early on in your story, but I'm starting to understand a bit why you minister the way you do, why you communicate the way you do.
Thank you.
You alluded to the fact...
Your wife is brilliant.
She is.
Yeah, she is.
She's got great taste in men.
Yeah. I didn't know she was interested in men. But,
nor did I.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Fortunately, it's just you and I. There's no one else to.
You know, we're supposed to be having coffee, but we don't have any coffee.
Yeah. When the interview starts going well, you'll get coffee.
Can somebody get me some tea? Oh, look at this. Wow. Oh, thank you so much. Wow, you don't get any.
I'm not doing that well.
No. Thank you. You know, it's when you say that, or when Sam said that, it's interesting because I write for a publishing company that's owned by, I think it's Random House. And they were walking through my next book, and I gave them a title that I thought would sell better. And the secular publisher said, this title doesn't fit him. And they came back and said that they told him, hey, we think he's created his own genre. And I thought that was the greatest compliment I've ever gotten as a writer.
Right.
You know, and when I used to write for another publisher, they later just said, we didn't really know what to do with your books. Barnes & Noble's actually, for a season, took my books and put them with Deepak Chopra and the Dalai Lama and some of these other people, and created their own section, because they go, it's not Christian, but see, actually I am, and but it's not Christianized thinking.
Yeah.
It's human thinking.
Yeah.
And a part of the challenge for me is that I actually, I was just at an event, and I told them, I said, you guys really get this wrong. You think there's intelligence, and then you think there's Jesus. And actually, Jesus is the highest form of thinking. And like a part of like what I'm really excited about is, I think there's genius inside of the church, but we haven't had permission to think and to create. I think we're more than we know. And so I just want to keep, and that's why I really am excited to actually get to interact with you, because that's what I've heard from people about you, is that you just keep removing the ceiling. And I think we need to just keep removing the ceiling, because there's more in us than we know.
When you say we haven't had permission to think, why do you think the church has been afraid to think, or where's that lack of permission come from?
I think some of it is the internal violence of thought, that if you disagree with an Orthodox Christian position, we destroy each other and call each other heretics. So we're so afraid to get pushed out of the fold that we stop thinking freely.
So give me an example.
Yeah, like Copernicus, we tried to kill him.
That's a good example.
And, right, I mean, God forbid you would ever think that the world was not flat, or that you would ever think that the earth revolved around the sun. Because everyone knows the Bible says that the earth revolves, that the sun revolves around the earth. Everybody knows that the Bible says the world is flat until we don't know that anymore.
Right.
And whenever it's not even like a breakthrough thought. See, a lot of times people act like, oh, that's really profound, or wow, that's a great insight. No, you're actually just looking at truth. You're just telling the truth, and you have the courage to tell the truth, and you violate the church's orthodoxy. Right. And like, I get myself in trouble. Like my wife, she grew up in church. We've been fighting for 35 years, over theology, and she believes that everything was created in 7 days and 24 hours. And I know Christians believe that. I don't know how Christians can believe that, but I know they do because the sun didn't exist till day 4. So I'm looking at the Bible going, see, I'm more biblical because I believe the sun wasn't created until day 4. But you somehow have a hard time accepting that. I was in Sweden. Anybody ever been to Sweden? Like the days last 6 months. And the nights last 6 months. So it's not even 7:24 right now. If you just change locations on this planet. So, but if you don't say 7:24, now you're a heretic. Right. And I look at the scriptures and I think my dilemma is I actually believe the Bible. I don't believe what we teach about the Bible. I believe the Bible. Right. And if the Bible violates what we believe, we have to surrender our beliefs to it. And I think that, for me, is what's really important. We were on the James today. You don't have to give up being biblical to be imaginative and inventive. Actually, the Bible will explode your imagination, ruin your understanding of reality, and just open up an entire new universe to you.
Do you think there's parts of the Bible that Christians and preachers are scared of?
Yeah, like we talked about last night, right? Where all the people come from that Cain was afraid of. We have so many things in the Bible, like where did Philip go after he talked to the Ethiopian? Right? There's all these things we just ignore in the Bible, go, not really there. And we have to decide, is it magic so that it's really just superstition? Or is there a reality there that presses against us that we don't really understand? That the reality is bigger than us? See, I think we haven't even begun to tap into the wonder of how God created us and created the world. And that excites me.
Let me take you back to your story for a moment. We were talking about the fact that truth became incredibly important to you because of the way that you were raised. You alluded in some of your sessions to the fact that as a young boy, these are my words now, but you were quite troubled.
No, I said I'm quite troubled. And once I was a boy.
Now you're just being contrary. Forgive me if I don't get this right, but were you suffering from, or did people think you had some sort of mental illness?
Yeah, the 70s, or, oh wow, no, the 60s, no. The 50s, and when I was born, it's that long ago. Isn't that crazy? And the view of psychology, psychiatry, mental illness was very different back then. Like now we're very nuanced. And by the way, the more you have something in a culture, the more language you have. So like in Alaska, there are more words for snow than there are in Indonesia. In Indonesia, there are more words for the color green than there would be in Alaska. And so the fact that we have so many distinctive terminologies for mental illness lets us know how much more pervasive it is now. So everyone knows even like code words, OCD, ADD, ADHD. Right? You know, we know all the language of it because we've become so much more nuanced. It. When I was growing up, it was just, you crazy. Right. That's it, right? You know, and there was just really just one or two phrases. And so I think there was a kind of a combination of two things. One, I was definitely psychologically like tormented. I was definitely like a broken human being. And a lot of it was nightmares. And even years ago, I had like a neurological EEG like study of my brain, and a part of my brain was always awake, and a part of my brain was always asleep. And while your delta, beta, alpha, you know, waves are supposed to work in sync, mine worked in conflict with each other. And so I would have nightmares for years and years and years, and those nightmares would be visible when I was still awake. And I wish I could tell you that was completely gone, but it's not. Like my wife, you know, still wakes up to me in the middle of intense nightmares, wide awake, fighting for my life, trying to talk me down, and my kids is trying to help me. And part of the reason I talk about this openly is because I didn't talk about it openly for a long time.
We never talk about stuff like this in the church.
No, it's like if there's anything about me that inspires someone, and or maybe someone says, oh man, you know, like people go, you ever go, I want to be like that person when I grow up? I want you to have a realistic view. Right. Like, you know, if I inspire anyone, then I want everyone to know it's not because it's all together. Right. It's not because I'm not broken in some places. It's not because I don't have things that still need to find their way through. And it's just that God is just capable of working with us in all of our imperfection. And I love that, you know. And so I still got stuff. I have still stuff I work through, and they've been with me since I was a child. When I went to this neuro center, they said, what kind of substances are you using? And I said, none. They said, nah, you're using something. And I said, no, I don't drink at all. Like, I'm so boring. Like, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I'm completely faithful to my wife. I mean, I am so utterly boring as a human being. You know, I don't have a single tattoo, although my soul is tatted up. And, you know, I mean, if you look at me like going, isn't it odd? I don't do anything really extreme, and yet I'm considered extremely extreme. Yeah. And I tell people, because a lot of us, we put our extreme on the outside. My extreme is at the center. And, but when they asked me if I was taking substances, I said, I'm not taking anything. They said, your brain is so damaged that no one could possibly function without substance abuse. And I told them, I said, no, what you see about my brain is true, but my brain does not have mastery over me. My soul has mastery over me. And you know, as I told these like doctors, these neuroscientists, you're right, but you're wrong. And because I found a health, I found a wholeness in my soul that has overridden all the brokenness and all the pain that I grapple with in the universe inside of me. And it's really, for me, a really beautiful thing. But I've been like that since I was probably 4 or 5 years old, you know? And if God wanted to change that, he could do it in an instant. So I accept it and go, maybe if God like put all the pieces together, I wouldn't be able to see the world with its beauty and wonder that I get to see it through, you know?
Because we were talking about the fact that, you know, at age 3, you're playing chess. You read...
I didn't say I was good, okay? You know, I was a 3-year-old.
You understood it. You're reading Catcher in the Rye at age 10. You read C.S. Lewis around the age of 11 or 12. You're into Greek mythology very early. You're reading about all of that kind of stuff. But you said you're a chronic introvert. So was it like there was a lot going on inside, but then you mentioned to me that you had an uncle who'd never heard you speak?
Well, that's what he said. I mean, I'm sure I spoke. I don't think he was listening. But he saw me years later, and the first thing he said to me is, do you talk now?
Right.
And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, you know, we used to take you, you'd never say a word. But I was unaware of that. You know,
right.
Because I would be living inside of my imagination,
right?
You know, and so a lot of things were happening there.
And then you started writing very early.
I did. I started writing when I was probably 11 or 12 years old, and I would write novels or short stories, and then I would bury them in the backyard. and I would hide my stories. And then I had two little sisters, and so I'd put them to bed at night, and every night I would create worlds and universes and tell them stories. You know, other people would read books and read fairy tales and read children's books, but I just thought that just seemed really mundane. And so every night I'd create characters and tell them stories about other universes and dimensions and different people. And sometimes there would be tragic endings and they would cry. And I would have to change the story. They go, no, it can't end like that. And then I go, oh, but then this happened. And, you know, but I think I learned the beauty and power of story really young.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you finish school, you go to university and study philosophy?
Not right away. I was a straight D student. So nobody wanted me. And I barely graduated from high school, so I didn't go to school right away. I just worked a lot of odd jobs. I worked as a lumberjack, a carpenter. I worked construction, flipped burgers and pizzas, you know, just whatever would pay the bills. Slept in my car sometimes, and I thought I got to go to college. I got to do something with my life. This can't be my life. And so I went to this one university. I walked in. I said I need to talk to like the president or whoever's in charge, and I think I had a little sign of madness, so they let me. They just let me go meet with the vice president, the president. And I said, I need you to let me into your school. And he said, son, there's a process you need to apply. You send in your transcripts. And I said, no, you know, if you see my transcripts, you won't let me in.
Yeah.
And I said, and I remember saying this, I said, I just need you to look at one human being in the face and give one human being a chance to have a future. And I don't know how, but that man found compassion in his heart and admitted me into university that day. And that's how I got into school. Right. And then I went to the school, and the counselor for gifted students didn't have enough students, so they gave me to her. And this is before I ever knew Jesus. And she said, hey, this document says you're going to flunk out of school after your first semester. You have to decide what your future is going to look like. And she was exactly what I needed. It was as if God put this person there ahead of time. Right. And then I ended up registering for classes, and I stumbled into a philosophy class, and I fell in love.
Right.
And I realized, oh, I like thinking, you know, because these people were like on a search for meaning.
Yeah.
And I began really with Socrates, just read everything Plato and Aristotle wrote, and over and over and over again. And I didn't know people were grappling with the big issues of life. And that just pulled me in. And then I just kept devouring philosophers. And it did a couple of things. One, it made me realize other people were trying to make sense of life just like me. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I thought, I don't think they have any answers either. So, you know, it drove me. I think it prepared me for Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
In all of this, when do you meet your wife, or does she come later in the story?
She came in later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before or after you found Jesus?
Oh, after.
Okay, so you're at university studying philosophy. What's the next stage in your life from there?
Well, in terms of Jesus, it was my mom calling me up one day and saying, hi, honey, I've become a Christian. And I'd never heard that phrase in my whole life.
Right.
But she sounded happy, so I was happy for her. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought it was like, hi, I'm a humanitarian, or I'm a vegetarian, or something, you know, something noble. Yeah. And I didn't really connect it to religion. But when I went home to see her during spring break, now she was going to a church. I didn't even know churches existed. It was the first time I ever seen a church building, really. And she was all excited, and my little sisters were going, and it made me a little nervous. It felt a little like cult-like. You know, it wasn't. It just felt like cult-like because it was irreligious, right?
What sort of church was it?
It was a Baptist church,
right.
Which was odd because we were nothing, but we were Roman Catholic, you know. And so Roman Catholics do not walk into Baptist churches, you know. And my mom, she had become a Buddhist when we were younger, and then she became Jewish. And she was on quite a search. And on a Good Friday, her world had fallen apart. This was like her second or third divorce, and just painful choices, you know, in life. And so on a Good Friday, she said she decided, I need to go like find God. So she tried to look for a Catholic church, but she couldn't find one. So she found a Methodist church. So she walked into a Methodist church, and they had a guest speaker, and he was a Baptist preacher. And she heard him, and she was living in another state. She used to sneak on the TV on Sundays. He happened to be the only preacher she would ever recognize in the world.
Wow.
and he happened to be there as a guest. I just moved to that city.
Wow.
And so she thought, I'm going to go hear this guy on Sunday. So on Sunday morning, she went to the Catholic church. And Sunday night, she went to the Baptist church. And then I heard him tell the story. Thousands of people there. He said he was on the platform about to preach. And he said he heard God say to him, I only want you to talk to this one woman right there. And he described exactly what Mom was wearing. You know, the woman with the black skirt, the white blouse, and the red jacket. And he preached the whole sermon, and only one person responded, and it was my mom. And that's when she gave her life to Jesus. And then she really just she was a powerful force right away. I mean, she always was in everything she did. And so then my sister started going to church, and that was a little weird because they would come up to me crying, going, we don't want you to go to hell. And I'd go, who told you I was going? And because I don't know, we're really fixated on everyone going to hell. And so right away, that was like their opening scenario to me, you know, crying. And I go, who told you that? And I just thought, this is this really judgmental group of people. Then my brother was an atheist. We went home for the summer, and he was going to church. He was an atheist. And he was reading the Bible as an atheist. And I said, what are you doing? And he goes, well, if I make a decision for God, it'll be an intellectual decision. I said, you're a liar. You're about to fall. You're just setting yourself up to make it look intelligent. And, you know, and I said, why are you going to church? He said, I trust the man who invited me. I said, what did he say to you? Because he said there was great volleyball and beautiful girls. It's such a noble journey, right? You know. And I said, well, what'd you find? He said, the volleyball is adequate. And he was right about the girls. And I thought, you know, I could use some religion in my life. And, you know, I mean, what do you expect from me, right? So I started popping in a little bit, sitting in the back. And every time, and even it was so irrelevant, like there were hymns, the message was more antiquated, the architecture was out of date, but love covers a multitude of irrelevance.
Wow.
You know, they were so kind to me and so loving and so caring, and they would see me and invite me to their house to go, you know, skiing in their lake, or because we were the only Latins in the whole church, and you know, and then they would invite us to this, and they were just so gracious. And I kept thinking, I really like these people, and I would argue, they would talk to me about God, and I would win the arguments, but I would never win. Because I'd walk away going, I think I lost, because I'm still me, and they're still them. And I actually wanted to be them.
You used that line the other night, and I wrote it down because I thought it was the most brilliant insight that if I beat you in the argument, but I actually want to be you. Which I thought was just such a great insight into the discourse we have with people around about us, that it's not always or even winning the argument, it's displaying the grace and the love of Jesus such that they won the point, but they're still them and I'm me.
That's right, because if you say to someone, Jesus will change your life, but they look at your life and they go, I don't want your life. I don't want that.
Right.
See, so if you're gonna use Jesus is gonna change your life, you need to have a life so compelling that people want that life.
Yeah.
You know, and they did. You know, I have to say, you know, everybody likes beating up on Baptists and Methodists and everybody else and Presbyterians and Pentecostals, but they may have been Baptists, but they were the most beautiful humans that I ever met in my life.
Right.
And I saw Jesus all over them, and it pulled me in. And then I got a little nervous because I could feel myself almost like opening up. And this man who hired me to work construction, he was a deacon at that church. He came up to me and he said, Erwin, you know, have you thought about giving your life to Jesus? I said, yeah, I've thought about it. No, now leave me alone. And so I was pretty definitive. And then I flew my girlfriend down because I needed something to stop me from making an impulsive decision to follow Jesus. So I flew my girlfriend down to try to fill that vacuum in my soul. And I dated her for 2 years. She'd never seen me express emotion in any way. And I sat down on a street corner. I just started weeping. And she didn't know what to do because I was not an emotional person. And she didn't know the reason I was weeping was I realized she can't fill what my soul needs. So I put her on a plane and I sent her back. And I still come to Jesus, okay? And then my brother comes to faith. My atheist brother comes to faith. And so I interview him, as an outsider. And I go, so what happened? He goes, it was really weird. And I said, well, explain. He goes, and this is what he told me. He goes, my brother's into some dark stuff. I tried to pray and invite Jesus into my life. And I couldn't say Jesus. So this Native American who was a believer, he rebuked the hindering spirits. I never heard that phrase in my entire life. That sounded like Star Wars or something, right? He said he rebuked the hindering spirits. And I said, and what happened? He goes, I started praying and I asked Jesus into my life. I went, that's like so creepy, weird, right? And I'm hearing this as an unbeliever. Hearing my brother who was an atheist tell me they rebuked hindering spirits. I don't know what a hindering spirit is. It sounds like a rock band from England. And, and so that, but I watched my brother, right? And then my family was still pretty immoral. Just frankly, you come to Jesus, you don't become moral on Tuesday, right? And frankly, I was more moral than my entire family. And I was in a moral dilemma, and I got really bad moral advice. And I don't want to go into real specifics. And I thought to myself, they're the ones that are going to heaven, and I'm the one going to hell. Because I can't explain it, but before I came to Jesus, I didn't sleep with anyone. See, I was a moral person. I didn't have sex before I was married, not because of Jesus, but because I didn't want to treat a woman as less valuable than myself. And I had this moral compass that I didn't know where it came from. And then I'm looking at my friends and my family who are Christians, and they're really not moral. And I just finally said, hey, if God lets you in, he has no standards. And that was my response to my brother.
That's a great
and my
insight.
family. I was right. I just didn't know how right I was.
Yeah.
Right? You know? And then I finally just, it was on Sunday night, on August 20th, 1978. I remember exactly when I decided, I thought, okay, God, if you're out there, I'm in, but I don't really know how this whole thing plays out. I'd never read a Bible in my life. I didn't have enough data or information. So I went forward, and this guy grabbed me, because it's a church where you go forward. Took me to the back. I wouldn't pray. I kept waiting for him to rebuke the hindering spirit. I did. I thought, because we all want things to be standardized. Right? And I kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and I thought, I don't think he knows he's supposed to do that thing, So finally, I just took it in my own hands and just did it myself. And
did you rebuke hindering spirits?
Inside of my eyes, I just said, I rebuke all the hindering spirits, whatever they are.
You cast demons out of yourself.
Somebody's got to get it done, right? So, and I prayed, I gave my life to Jesus, and I don't know if I've shared this in 30 years, but, and I think this sounds really, really bizarre. I don't think my own guys know this. I couldn't see anything except for absolute light.
Are your eyes open or closed?
Open.
Right.
But I was and they took me and guided me out, and all I could see was this overwhelmingly blinding light. I never talked about this, and because I know it sounds so bizarre,
Was it scary or was it?
No, I felt like I was just consumed in the presence of God. Right. And I came out, and later I found out, I didn't know this. And this is a mega church, thousands. When I came out, they gave me a standing ovation, but I didn't know that. They've been waiting the whole summer. Like somehow it became like the church project, and, to lead me to faith. And I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't. And I remember my mom came up and she grabbed me. You know how mom's always trying to get you to do it right? And she said, I heard her say, honey, look at the pastor when he's talking to you. But I couldn't see anything. And so I felt them turn me to him. And the first thing I saw is when he said, do you declare Jesus as Lord? And will you obey his word? And that was the first thing I saw, and I just said yes. And it was for me like this unbelievably transcendent moment. I was baptized that Friday night, I finally asked a girl out because no girls would date me because this unequally yoked thing. And so now I had a yoke. So I was gonna apply it. And so my first date as a Christian was at a prison that Friday night, because all these Christians were going to a prison, right? So I asked this girl, hey, do you want to go to prison with me? And
You Casanova, you?
yeah. And so I went to this event, and I remember all the convicts were seated first, and then all the Christians were supposed to go sit at their tables, but the Christians were like such good people. They were terrified of the convicts. They were all just clustering, and I felt embarrassed. And so I started grabbing the Christians and sending them to tables. And I still looked, more like a convict, and it was intense. And then I went and sat down with these 3 convicts, and I had a Thompson Chain Reference King James Bible that the only black man in the church came and gave me. He gave me this Bible with my name engraved on it when I came to Jesus. He knew before I came to Jesus. And he came up to me and he said, 3 years ago, a man named Scott Leonard gave me a Bible and told me that God called me to preach. 3-4 years before that, a man came to him and gave him that Bible, and told him God had called him to preach. So I've been waiting for 3 years for God to tell me who I was supposed to give a Bible to. And this man came up and said, I'm giving you this. I'm telling you, God has called you to preach the gospel. That's the day I was converted. And he was the janitor in the church. And so I thought everybody got one of those. I thought everybody had like their personal prophet and who gave them a Bible. And so I sit down with these 3 guys with my King James Bible, which I had not yet really opened a whole lot, only for 4 days. It was Friday. I looked at these guys and I said, man, I've only known Jesus for 3 days, but I wish I could tell you what he means to me. And the guy in the middle said, hey, we're listening. And I didn't know what to do next. But then they were calling people to eat, and they called him out by letter. And when he left, one of the Christians took his seat because they were worried that I was there with them. And when he came back, he didn't have a seat, so he went and stood against the wall with his food. I didn't know a lot about Jesus or Christianity, but I knew what it's like to be disconnected and be left out. So I got up, I grabbed my Bible, I walked over to this guy, and I said, hey, man, I'm sorry you didn't have a seat. Do you want my seat? He goes, no. I said, hey, do you really want to know about Jesus? And he goes, yeah. And I said, okay. I said, and they told me to memorize Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, Romans 10:9 and 8. I guess the Roman road thing. But no one ever told me where Romans was. All right? So I had this big old giant Bible, and I'm thinking it must be like somewhere in the beginning with kings, Romans, kings, and countrymen. And so I started like looking through the Bible, and I started going, hey, well, in Romans it says, and I couldn't find Romans, and I went, in Romans it says, and like in Romans it says, and the guy looked at me and goes, I can't read anyway. I said, you can't read at all? He goes, no, and I went, oh, in Romans it says. And I'd only been a Christian like 3 days, okay, And I shared with them what I remembered from the last Sunday night. He got on his knees and he gave his life to Jesus with me 4 days after I came to Jesus. And then when everybody wanted to leave to go to a football game, I wanted to stay at the prison because I said, no, everybody here needs this. And I don't know which one changed my life, when I gave my life to Jesus or when I saw this guy give his life to Jesus. But that moment was a defining moment for me because I realized I have the power to give life to the world. And that for me was like a defining moment.
I think we might take a break now, because that seems like a really good segue to then come back and take questions from people here.